microbiology. I hope you've had a good spring break. We're going to start the week with fungi, obviously from your graphing exercise. That was just like an intro. Make sure you're still knowing how to graph. The only big thing was you didn't put units on your diameter. But other than that, y'all did really well. I'm really proud of y'all. I'm sorry it was a little bit of thinking, but we're trying to get you guys not to just copy and paste a table and then just hit the insert button. So sometimes you have to actually analyze your data. We're going to get started today on the domain Eukarya, and we're in the kingdom fungi. Okay, so why are fungi in microbiology? Because when you think of microbiology, you're thinking about teeny tiny things you can only see with a microscope. So when you guys think of fungi, automatically a mushroom probably pops into your head. Okay, well, the reason is the most important part of any organism is its reproductive structures, and all of their reproductive structures are microscopic. So that's why they are classified in the field under microbiology. Okay, so there are macroscopic mushrooms and smuts and rust and all that fun stuff. But majority of the organisms' structures for reproduction are microscopic, and there's one microscopic cell, which is yeast. Okay, the general characteristics of fungi are they're non-modal. That's a big characteristic that puts animals as an animal. So they are sessile, which means they are attached to the ground or some kind of substrate. They are multicellular, most of them. So like 90% of all fungi are multicellular. The only unicellular fungi is yeast. Okay, so that's an important fact. They are eukaryotic, so that we're not prokaryotic. We're not like a bacteria. So the big differences here are we do have a nucleus now, which is going to be important for tomorrow when we talk about reproduction, and we have organelles. Okay, another big difference structurally with fungi is their cell walls are not made of peptidoglycan or cellulose like a plant, but they're made of something called chitin. Okay, and you know how to say it correctly. The other big defining characteristic of fungus is the lipid in their cell membrane. They have a lipid called an ergosterol. And so that is, if you ever have a fungus infection from like athlete's foot or like a nail infection, they're going to give you an antifungal, and the antifungal attacks the cell membrane by specifically attacking those ergosterols. Okay, so another big characteristic of fungi are their heterotrophic decomposers. Okay, so let's break down that. Okay, they're heterotrophic means they have to have an outside carbon source. Okay, we are also heterotrophic, but we're not decomposers. Okay, we have internal digestion. It's completely different than actually breaking down material outside of the body. Okay, they're not photosynthetic. There's no photosynthetic fungi, so most of the time when you think about a fungus, it's like in a dark area. They don't need sunlight. This is another cool characteristic by them that puts them as fungi, not animals, is that they feed by external digestion, which means they secrete out the digestive enzymes into the environment and then they suck it up like a sponge. Okay, now the fancy word for decomposer is called saprophyte. Okay, so that's any organism that feed or live on decaying matter. So that's a new vocabulary. Sometimes they're called saprobes. So either saprobe or saprophytes is fine. So that's just a big fancy word over decomposer because there's also something called a detritivore that we're not going to get into. Okay. So what do fungus need to grow? Okay, they have to have that outside carbon source. Okay, so they need some type of organic material that they can break down, and that's usually plant cellulose because they do break down mostly plants. They need moisture, and that's because they need for reproduction. So that's why you usually only see mushrooms after it rains. Okay, if you're going through a drought, you're not really going to see a mushroom. Okay, because they have to have moisture to release their spores. Okay, and their spores come from what you guys see as a mushroom or what we call a fruiting body, which I'll get to in a minute. They can live anywhere because they have spores, so they're pretty climate tolerant and acid tolerant. All right, so the general structure of fungi, which we have talked about before, okay, they have single root-like structures. Don't call them roots. They're single tubes that are called hyphae. So you might remember me saying hyphae. So hyphae are a single root-like structure that are going to release those digestive enzymes. A mass of those are called mycelium. So you have one which is hyphae, and then a group of them is called mycelium. Okay, now you do have a wall, okay, called a septa. So this would be a hyphae. You have your individual cells, so these are nuclei, okay, and then if they have a chitin wall, that's called a septa. Okay, so the hyphae, like I said before, are just those tubes that contain digestive enzymes, and that's what's going to release into the environment to break down anything around the substrate or where it's anchored. Okay, and then they're going to suck it up through the cell walls. Okay, so they all have cytoplasm and they have nuclei, and they can contain more than one if they don't have septa, which we'll get into because there are 3 different types of hyphae. There are the septated ones, like this, where you would have the cell wall in between. If the septa was missing, it would be called a non-septate or a coencentic. So coencentic means basically their cytoplasms are together. So there's nothing separating the cytoplasms, but the nuclei would still be separated, as you can see in this diagram. Okay, now yeast are weird, number one, because they're unicellular. They're the only unicellular fungus. And they have a process called budding. So when they bud off of one another, they're going to create new structures, which they kind of look like hyphae, but they're really not because they're individual cells. So we call those pseudo-hyphae, so false hyphae. Mycelium is that group of hyphae, okay? So it literally means more than one, and it's just a bunch of hyphae that are intertwined. Now, the cool thing about this is when you look at an actual mushroom or a puffball or a shelf fungus, that's only like 10% of the whole entire fungus. 90% is underneath the ground as mycelium. One of the largest organisms on Earth is an actual fungus because its mycelium reaches miles, okay? So don't just think because you see a tiny little mushroom that that's the whole entire organism. It's not. Okay, like most of the organism itself and the living, not breathing, but living structure is underground. Okay, so the job of the mycelium is to help absorb the nutrients from the hyphae. Okay, all right, so the fruiting body is what you guys see when you actually see a fungus. Okay, the whole point of the fruiting body is to release spores for reproduction. So, we like the fruiting bodies because we can see them and they have lots and lots of cool structural details, which you'll get to see tomorrow. But this is how we are classifying fungi. So if you are a mycologist, you study mycology, which is the study of fungi. Okay, so this is how all the kind of fungi are classified, is basically what are their fruiting bodies look like. So we're going to kind of go over those tomorrow. That's how they're classified in the 4 divisions. Okay, you do have a quiz tomorrow. There will be a Quizlet on the portal. If you have any questions, please ask, guys. Okay, we want to get your grades up as much as possible because we don't have that much longer till summer. Bye, guys.